Secret of the Sword. Hardly anyone knows that Prince Adam of Eternia can use the Sword of Power to become He-Man, Master of the Universe, not even his mother and father. But there is another sword in existence, the Sword of Protection, which also has magic powers. This book is the story of how the sorceress sent Adam to find the owner of the Sword of Protection. He set off through a time gate and found himself in the land of Etheria, ruled by the evil Hordak and his minions, the Horde. The owner, surprisingly, turned out to be Adora, Adam's twin sister, stolen as a baby from the king and queen of Eternia. And one last enormous surprise. The Sword of Protection turned Adora into Princess She-Ra, with all sorts of strange powers. But only He-Man and the sorceress know of Adora's dual identity. In Castle Grayskull, deep in the heart of Eternia, the sorceress tossed in a troubled sleep, dreaming of the past. Of Hordak, leader of the evil horde that menaced the land of Eternia. In her dream, she saw him holding a baby girl in his arms.
You may have defeated us,
He was saying.
but you will never see this child again.
Adora!
Cried the sorceress, and woke up, weeping. Through her tears, she saw a sword glowing in the air, beckoning her. She followed it through the corridors until it stopped at a closed door. Then suddenly the door burst open, revealing a mysterious time gate glimmering at the doorway. The sword fell to the floor,
Can it be the Sword of Protection?
said the sorceress, picking it up.
After so long.
Prince Adam was in the kitchens of the royal palace of Eternia. He was baking spice bread, watched by his pet tiger, Cringer. Suddenly, he heard the sorceress calling him by telepathy. Seconds later, he and Cringer stood beside her in front of the time gate.
If this is a gate, where does it go to?
Asked Adam,
That I cannot say.
said the sorceress.
This door has never opened before.
You want me to pass through this gate and find someone on the other side, and you can't tell me who this person is?
The sorceress handed him the Sword of Protection.
This sword will lead you to the one you seek.
She said,
Why,
said Adam.
except for the jewel in it, this sword looks exactly like mine.
And like yours, it is intended for someone of a special destiny.
Said the sorceress. Adam put it on his back, beside his own Sword of Power, and he went forward with Cringer through the time gate. Now Adam and Cringer found themselves in the beautiful world of Etheria, ruled by the evil Horde.
There's an inn.
Said Adam, looking about him.
We might get food there.
Inside, a minstrel was playing his harp, and Bo, the rebel, sat in a corner, cowl on his shoulder.
Do you think he's a spy for the Horde, Cowl?
Asked Bo.
Unlikely.
Said the cowl, looking at Adam.
Horsemen don't often smile.
The door slammed, and 3 troopers stalked in. Cringer dived under a table, and Bo's face grew grim.
Horseman.
He growled. No one spoke as the hordemen sat down at a table. Then the minstrel began to play again.
I don't like that, son.
Said one of the hordemen, and fired at the harp. Adam was annoyed. He picked up the hordeman and threw him into a barrel. Then Bo decided to help with the other 2. As the fight raged from one side of the inn to the other, Cowl joined Cringer under the table. When Bo and Adam had disposed of the 3 hordemen, one to a barrel, they shook hands. Cowl and Cringer crept out sheepishly.
The Horde will send a force squad after us now.
Said Cowl. Bo nodded.
You'd better come with us to Whispering Woods, Adam, and help with our great rebellion.
In the main hall of Doom Tower, in the Fright Zone, a messenger was speaking.
Mighty Hordak, I bring you bad news from the village of Thamor in Bright Moon. 3 of our troopers were defeated by 2 rebels.
Shadow Weaver glided up with more bad news.
A stranger from another world has come to Etheria, bringing with him the seeds of great trouble for the Horde. He is somewhere in the kingdom of Bright Moon, but my spells can no longer find him.
Bright Moon?
Hissed Catra, standing near.
Could he have beaten our troopers, Hordak?
You may be right, Catra.
Said Hordak. He shouted to a hordeman,
Send Force Captain Adora to me at once.
Then he spoke to the villains around him.
We will teach this stranger it's not nice to cause trouble for the evil Horde.
Meanwhile, Bo had taken Adam into Whispering Woods to meet Glimmer, leader of the rebels. She was the daughter of Queen Angela, who had once ruled Bright Moon. On the way to the camp, Adam also met Spragg, one of the Twiggets who lived in the woods. Just as Bo was telling Glimmer that he and Adam had taught 3 hordemen a lesson in the village of Thamor, Madame Raz flew in with Broom. She had news. A Horde force captain and 4 villains had arrested everyone in the village of Thamor because of the fight at the inn.
If the culprits don't give themselves up, Hordak says he will send the whole village to the mines as slaves.
He'd do it too, the fiend.
Said Glimmer.
Surely we can save the village without giving ourselves up.
Said Adam.
I've a friend who might help.
He added quietly. Glimmer looked at Spragg and the peasant rebels nearby, and they nodded.
All right then, let's save Thamor!
She cried, and everyone cheered.
Hooray!
At that very moment, the villagers were being loaded into the Horde slave transporter. Catra and the 3 other Horde villains, standing by their Horde flyers, were grumbling.
If Force Captain Adora wasn't Hordak's favorite, she wouldn't be in charge, and we wouldn't have to do as she says,
said Leech. Mantenna was very unhappy.
That's right.
He said.
We could have some fun destroying the village.
Then there was a shout.
For Bright Moon, attack!
It was Glimmer leading the little band of rebels to the rescue. The hordemen were taken by surprise, but they soon recovered. The rebels were few, and the villains soon began to gain the upper hand in the battle. When Adam saw this happening, he decided that it was time for He-Man to help.
By the power of Grayskull!
He called and raised the Sword of Power. Seconds later, he was He-Man, and his cowardly cat had become Battle Cat. The fight began all over again. He-Man and Battle Cat fought hard, and to start with, they were winning. Then Mantenna's beam hit He-Man, and he fell. The beam was destroying his sense of balance. He managed to get to his feet, but then he found that Force Captain Adora was firing at him. He flung his sword at her, smashing her blaster, and she turned to run. When he caught up with her, she had her back to the wall, her sword out. He-Man pulled out the Sword of Protection and broke Adora's weapon with one swift move. As he did so, he saw to his amazement that the Sword of Protection was glowing. He lowered it, puzzled.
You must be the one I came to find,
he said.
Is that so?
Said Adora, smiling cruelly as she watched a hordeman taking aim at He-Man. He fired, and as He-Man fell to the ground, Adora said,
You're mine now, stranger. You and this curious sword.
Back at the rebel camp, Madame Raz and 3 of the Twiggets were holding hands in a circle round a little tree. Madame Raz was casting a spell, and Glimmer and Bo were watching anxiously, along with Battle Cat.
I hope Madame's spell can find He-Man,
whispered Glimmer to Bo. Suddenly a picture formed at the top of the little tree,
Dearie me,
said Madame Raz.
it's Beast Island.
I've heard rumors that the Horde have a prison there.
Said Bo.
If that's where He-Man is,
said Battle Cat.
let's go.
Madame Raz started on another spell, but it went wrong. At last, she managed to magic a flying ship just above the trees. Glimmer transported herself aboard and helped the others up, and they set off for Beast Island. For once, Madame Raz hadn't got it wrong at all. He-Man was on Beast Island, imprisoned on a huge slab of stone by electro-bonds. Force Captain Adora was standing beside him, the sword of protection in her hand.
I'm Force Captain Adora.
She said, swishing the blade through the air.
This sword feels as if it were made just for me.
I'm He-Man,
said her prisoner.
I thought the sword was for you when it glowed, but I was to give that sword to someone who served good, and you serve evil.
You're the one who serves evil, rebel. I serve the Horde, the rightful rulers of Etheria.
You must have seen how the Horde treats people,
said He-Man.
I've spent most of my life training in the Fright Zone,
said Adora.
I don't know much about the rest of Etheria.
You should go and find out. Or are you afraid to?
Taunted He-Man.
I'm afraid of nothing,
said Adora.
But I'll think about it.
He put the sword back in its sheath and walked thoughtfully away. On Madame Raz's flying ship, Glimmer and Bo were keeping watch. Cowl perched beside them on the rail.
Beast Island,
Glimmer said suddenly, pointing downwards. As everyone came to peer down, Bo said,
Uh-oh. We've got trouble.
It was Hordak, in his Annihilator, on his way to the prison. Shadow Weaver sat beside him. He smiled nastily as he saw them and punched a button. Seconds later, the little flying ship fell out of the sky. Its mast and sail had gone, smashed by a ball of pulsating energy from Hordak's cannons. The Horde leader grinned and flew on into the prison. Flames roared and licked at the crashed ship. Surely no one could still be alive. Or could they? A glowing bubble of light emerged from the fire. Glimmer's magic powers holding the rebels safe within its circle. Everyone gathered round as she sank to the ground, exhausted. Cowl watched her, worried.
The Horde might send men here.
He said.
Better to leave this area immediately.
I'll carry her,
said Battle Cat. Bo helped Glimmer into the saddle, and they set off once more to rescue He-Man. Inside the prison, Shadow Weaver was praising Adora.
You have served the Horde well by capturing this stranger,
said Shadow Weaver.
His name is He-Man,
said Adora.
I'm proud of you too, Adora,
said Hordak.
Thank you, Mighty One,
said Adora.
May I return to the Fright Zone now? I have to do some investigating.
Of course,
said Hordak.
Go.
As Adora left, Shadow Weaver said,
There's something here I don't understand. She should be watched.
Hordak brushed her words aside. Adora had always been a favorite of his.
She's loyal enough. The spells you have put on her make sure of that.
Madame Raz and the little band of rebels were still having a bad time as they struggled through the jungle on their way to the prison. One of the terrible beasts after which the islands was named came after them, shrieking its rage. First Battle Cat, then Bo tried to stop it, without success. Madame Raz tried to magic it away, but she got the spell wrong, as she so often did. The rest ran for their lives, but the monster landed right on top of Bo. But Battle Cat had a surprise in store. Before the monster could make another move, it was hit by one juicy fruit after another. Bo and Battle Cat fled as the monster tried to clear its eyes to see.
Thanks, Battle Cat,
said Bo. Shadow Weaver's doubts had been right. Adora had dressed in the clothes of an Etherian peasant and had gone out on her horse Spirit. She was going to see just how the Horde did treat the Etherians. He-Man must be wrong. As she rode out through one gate, telling the sentry she was on a secret mission for Hordak, the rebels went in through another gate. Bo and Glimmer had overcome the guards and taken their uniforms. They were unlucky once more, however. From the moment they arrived at the prison, Grizzlor had been watching on a view screen. Now he pressed a button, and the doors near the rebels slid shut. A ray projector beamed in, and everyone cowered away. Then Bo shot an arrow up the narrow barrel, and the projector exploded. Battle Cat smashed a door down, and the rebels started to look for He-Man again. But Grizzlor still had an eye on them, and he told Hordak they were there. Meantime, Adora was out in the fright zone, watching and listening. She saw slaves in a horde slave caravan being ill-treated by the cruel troopers. Whips were flourished to hurry the slaves along, and when one old man asked for water, he was flung in a pool. Later, she saw a peasant's house blown up, just because he said the horde's taxes were too high. Adora was growing very unhappy. It looked as if He-Man was right. While Adora was out learning the truth, the rebels had found He-Man. But Hordak, Grizzlor, and Shadow Weaver had been waiting for them. Shadow Weaver paralyzed Bo, Glimmer, Madame Raz, and Broom with magic smoke. Battle Cat was tied up, unable to move. There was no sign of Cowl.
Welcome to Beast Island, rebels,
said Hordak. He-Man was struggling once more to get free of his electro-bonds.
You villain! What have you done to them?
They are merely out of action for a time. Better to ask what I will do to them if you do not tell me why you have come to Etheria.
He-Man was silent. After a moment, Grizzlor took the rebels off to a cell, and Hordak said,
We will give you time to think. Come, Shadow Weaver.
As the two villains went off, Cowl flapped down from where he had been hiding.
Can you get me loose?
Said He-Man.
Certainly.
Said Cowl.
Give me a moment.
He flapped off to the control console and started to peck at the buttons. All of a sudden, the force field faded and He-Man sat up.
Let's go find our friends,
he said to Cowl.
I've had enough of this place.
Now He-Man went into action. He pulled the door off the rebel's cell and said,
Time to go, folks.
Glimmer was worried.
We have to get to one of the Horde flyers. It's the only way off the island.
I believe the Horde's landing pad is to our right,
said Cowl. They set off, but it wasn't going to be quite so easy. As they came out onto the landing pad, Grizzlor came straight for them in a Destructo tank, all cannons firing. He-Man waited until it was almost on him. Then he raised his fist in one mighty punch. The tank fell to pieces, and Grizzlor hit the ground, a stunned expression on his face.
Come on, He-Man!
Yelled Glimmer. All the others were inside a flyer, anxious to return to Whispering Woods.
I've one more job to do. Take off and wait,
said He-Man. And as they watched from a safe distance, He-Man pulled and heaved and cracked off the whole mountain tip. Then he dropped it on the prison. A flyer picked him up, and as he got in, He-Man said,
That's one prison the Horde will have to do without.
Hordak was now back in the fright zone, in his own quarters. He was talking to Shadow Weaver.
This He-Man is too dangerous to us. We must find out why he is here and how we can stop him.
As he spoke, Adora came in. The sword of protection was in her hand, and she pointed it at them both.
I've been seeing for myself how we rule Etheria.
She said,
You lied to me. The Horde is evil, cruel, unjust, and the people hate us.
She was angry, but she was also confused. Hordak had always been her hero. Shadow Weaver whispered to Hordak.
My spell on her has weakened. It has something to do with the sword she holds.
Then you must strengthen the spell,
said Hordak. Shadow Weaver glided over to Adora, who swung the sword towards her.
Stay away!
Oh, surely you would not harm me, Adora? Am I not like a mother to you?
Asked Shadow Weaver. She suddenly waved her hand across Adora's face, casting a spell on her.
Sleep,
said Shadow Weaver softly, and Adora crumpled to the floor.
First, this He-Man arrives, and now Adora turns against me,
said Hordak.
Remember who she really is,
said Shadow Weaver.
Yes,
Said Hordak, pondering.
yes.
I must find out the secrets of this sword,
Said Shadow Weaver, looking at it.
and those of He-Man as well.
Hordak looked thoughtfully across at her. Then they both began to laugh wickedly. The rebels were now safely back in Whispering Woods, and He-Man had become Adam once more. Glimmer was arguing with him.
You'll be captured for certain if you go back to the Fright Zone, Adam.
Sorry, Glimmer. I've a mission that must be performed, safe or not.
Said Adam. He looked down at Cringer.
You'll have to stay here, Cringer. You're too noticeable.
He said goodbye to the rebels and left. On the roof of Doom Tower, Hordak was admiring a huge ray machine. He turned to Shadow Weaver and Adora.
At last, it is finished. A thing of beauty. It's my new Magna Beam transporter. See that old battle wagon? I don't need it anymore, so...
Hordak pressed a button, and the battle wagon shimmered for a moment, then vanished.
Where did it go?
Asked Mantenna.
Look,
Said Hordak, pointing to the view screen.
it's gone to the Valley of the Lost. No one ever returns from there. When my Magna Beam is at full power, I shall send all the rebels there, and we'll have no more trouble. Let's go down to the plunder room, and I'll show you how we charge it up.
Down in the plunder room, Hordak told his villains that willpower, and a lot of it, was needed to charge up the Magna Beam. The guards locked a prisoner into the Magna Beam booth, and everyone watched. The prisoner was defiant to start with, but gradually fell silent, completely drained. Hordak looked at the Magna Beam indicator.
Bah! He'd less willpower than I'd hoped. We must capture more rebels.
Unfortunately for Adam, he too was on his way to the Magna Beam booth, although he didn't yet know it. He had transformed into He-Man, then captured a Horde trooper and put his uniform on. But Shadow Weaver and Hordak saw him on the view screen. They knew him at once.
He would be a source of great power.
Said Shadow Weaver.
All the energy we need.
As He-Man marched into the Fright Zone, he suddenly saw Adora and hurried to her.
How did you get here?
She gasped. She started to draw her stun pistol, and he stopped her.
You don't need that,
he said.
You must know about the Horde by now.
What I know is that you are a lying rebel spy.
She said, her face hardening under Shadow Weaver's spell.
You are under arrest.
Now Hordak arrived with some guards. He-Man put up a good fight, but he was soon overpowered. And then, there he was, in the Magna Beam booth. During the night, as He-Man's strength slowly drained away, Adora tossed and turned in her sleep. She muttered from time to time,
No, it's evil.
Then, through Adora's dreams, the sorceress called softly,
Adora.
and she woke up. After a moment, Adora said,
Something strange is happening. I must find out what it is.
She went straight to the plunder room. He-Man lay slumped in the booth, and the Magna Beam indicator stood at full. The two great swords were on a pedestal nearby.
Everything seems in order.
Said Adora. Then she looked almost sadly at He-Man.
The strong rebel grows weaker. But it is for the good of the Horde. Why do I feel so not sure.
She turned to go. And the gem in the Sword of Protection suddenly glowed, startling her. The sorceress's face floated in the glow.
It's time to throw off the Horde spell, Adora. Use this sword to help you to right wrongs and protect the weak. But first, you must save He-Man. A rebel?
Asked Adora, confused.
He is no rebel. He is a champion of goodness. But he is also your twin brother. The Horde stole you when you were a baby.
Her voice faded.
For the honor of Grayskull.
Adora slowly raised the Sword of Protection.
For the honor of Grayskull.
She repeated. Then,
I am She-Ra!
She cried, and smashed the Magna Beam booth. He-Man lifted his head weakly.
Who are you?
He asked.
A friend.
Said She-Ra. He looked across at the Sword of Power.
My sword?
Suddenly understanding, She-Ra tossed it to him. His strength flooded back, and he cried,
I have the power.
Then he turned to She-Ra.
Let's get out of here.
It was too late. Hordak had arrived on the scene. First, he looked at the Magna Beam indicator.
My beam is fully charged,
He said, pleased. Then,
I don't know who you are,
he said to She-Ra.
but your rescue is too late. Gods, arrest these two rebels. I'm going upstairs to take care of the rest of the rebels with my Magna Beam.
With that, he went away.
What is this Magna Beam?
Asked He-Man.
Don't ask.
Said She-Ra.
We must stop him.
I'll take care of that.
Said He-Man.
You go and warn the rebellion.
As He-Man started to fight off the guards, She-Ra turned and made for the stable and her horse, Spirit. But as she climbed on his back, he became Swift Wind, a winged unicorn, carrying She-Ra to warn the rebels. Now, He-Man was going after Hordak. He found him on the Fright Zone roof, just switching on the Magna Beam. But She-Ra had looked back as she flew away and had seen what was happening. She found a huge rock and threw it into the path of the beam. Both rock and beam disappeared instantly. Hordak was furious.
My Magna Beam! Wasted! Well, I still have some power left to try again.
But He-Man had other ideas. He gave the machine a mighty punch and split it down the middle. As it split, an enormous burst of energy was released. The energy spread outwards from the ruined Magna Beam, and when it reached the Horde's prisoners, it gave them their willpower. Without wasting a moment, they broke out and went back to Whispering Woods to help the rebellion. Hordak was white with rage.
I've still got you, rebel. I'm going to freeze you solid with freeze rays.
But he was wrong again. She-Ra swooped down on Swift Wind and lifted He-Man to safety, just in time.
Thanks.
Said He-Man.
No problem.
Said She-Ra.
What are sisters for, anyway?
Sister?
Said He-Man, puzzled. She-Ra smiled.
He-Man, I think we've a lot to talk about.
She said. Deep in Whispering Woods, Swift Wind shone white in the moonlight. She-Ra stroked him while He-Man was speaking.
I don't understand. You're my sister? But I never had a sister.
I didn't know I had a brother until the woman in the sword told me so.
Said She-Ra.
The sword?
Said He-Man.
It must be the sorceress.
He lifted the Sword of Protection and called,
Sorceress! Can you hear me?
Its jewel gleamed, and the sorceress spoke.
Now I can answer all your questions. Years ago, twins were born to the king and queen of Eternia. One of these babies was you, Adam, and the other was Adora. The king and queen were delighted, but their joy soon turned to sorrow. a terrible force called the Horde, led by a fiend called Hordak, tried to conquer Eternia.
The sorceress paused, looking back.
But they were no match for King Randor and my magic, and we defeated them. The Hordak, with his favorite pupil Skeletor, decided to steal both the Queen's babies in revenge. But they got only Adora, because Man-at-Arms caught the villains in the act. Hordak escaped with Adora, but Skeletor was caught and told us the way to Hordak's secret base. When Man-at-Arms and I arrived there to rescue Adora, Hordak was standing at the time gate, the baby in his arms. He said, "You may have defeated us, but you'll never see this child again." Then he went through the time gate. We never told Adam about you, Adora, because no matter how we searched, we couldn't find you.
There, the sorceress's story ended. As the sorceress's voice faded, She-Ra looked troubled.
But I can't just leave Etheria and go back to Eternia. The rebellion needs me.
You will have to think things over,
said He-Man.
Now, how about giving your brother a big hug?
He-Man and She-Ra became Adam and Adora once more, as they heard voices nearby in the woods. It was Bo and Glimmer arguing. They were startled to see Adam and Adora, and still more surprised to learn that Adora was Adam's sister.
I'm with the rebellion now,
said Adora.
I was only serving the Horde because of Shadow Weaver's evil spell. Anyway, what's the argument about? Can we help?
My mother, Queen Angela, was the last ruler of Bright Moon. I've just found out she's a slave to Hunga, the leader of the Harpies of Talon Mountain. We must rescue her, but Bo thinks it's too dangerous,
said Glimmer.
We can do that better than you,
said Adora.
Just leave it to us. Let's go, Adam.
And as soon as they were out of sight, they became She-Ra and He-Man. As Swift Wind dipped towards Talon Mountain, He-Man and She-Ra on his back, Hunga the Harpy was watching on a view screen. Near her, Queen Angela was chained to the floor.
We have visitors,
said Hunga.
Let us prepare a surprise.
So when She-Ra and He-Man burst in and raced over to free Angela from her chains, it turned out to be Hunga the Harpy in disguise. Her force beams threw them to the floor to start with. Then she used her magic to put a cage round them. He-Man and She-Ra grinned at each other and brought their own magic into play. First, they destroyed the cage. Then they went after the Queen Harpy. She was soon tied up and gagged. They found Queen Angela and set her free.
Come on,
said He-Man.
Your daughter Glimmer wants to see you.
The rebels started to cheer and went on cheering as Queen Angela arrived. When she put her arms round her daughter Glimmer, they were both so happy they burst into tears. She-Ra turned to He-Man.
I was thinking, with Queen Angela back, the rebels will have a much better chance. I could go and see my mother and father in Eternia.
As Adam and Adora, they set off on Spirit, with Cringer loping alongside.
There's one thing, Adora,
said He-Man.
Mother and father don't know I'm He-Man, and you mustn't tell them you're She-Ra either.
As he was speaking, two Horde troopers saw them riding by.
That's Force Captain Adora,
said one.
We must tell Hordak.
Just as Adora and Adam were going through the time gate, Hordak arrived to see Adora disappearing.
She's not going to escape me!
He howled, and transforming to his rocket shape, he went through the gate after her. On the other side of the time gate, in Castle Grayskull, the sorceress said,
Welcome back to Eternia, Princess.
Adora looked puzzled.
Princess?
You are the daughter of a king and queen, remember?
Smiled Adam. Then the sorceress raised her hands, and the little party disappeared once more, to find themselves in the royal palace of Eternia. When the king and queen realized that Adora was their long-lost daughter, they could hardly speak for joy. Even Man-at-Arms brushed away a tear as he told Tila,
She's Adam's twin sister, and she's back after all this time.
When Hordak first went through the Time Gate and realized he was on Eternia, he made for Skeletor's hideout in Snake Mountain. Skeletor wasn't pleased to see Hordak again, and they began a tremendous fight. Hordak called a halt first.
It's stupid to fight like this,
He said,
I'm only here to recapture Princess Adora, daughter of King Randor. Help me to get her back, and I'll leave you in peace. You don't frighten me, Hordak!
said Skeletor.
But I'll help you, if only to get rid of you.
Then he laughed wickedly.
I've just thought of a plan. Why, it'll be just like the old days,
chuckled Hordak. The villain's plan worked. The royal family was having dinner when an enormous cake was wheeled in by 3 cooks. The cooks were really Skeletor and his villains, and Hordak was inside the cake. They took everyone by surprise. Adora was captured very quickly and taken to Snake Mountain. There she faced the Time Gate with Hordak. But Skeletor's idea was different. His villains threw Hordak through the gate, and Adora was taken to the dungeons. This was her chance. Adora escaped, found her sword, and transformed to She-Ra. Fighting her way out, she met He-Man, Tila, Man-at-Arms, and Battle-Cat, who were on their way to rescue Adora.
The princess is safe,
She told them. When Snake Mountain grew quiet again, Skeletor could be heard saying feebly,
A female He-Man! This is the worst day of my life!
Back in the royal palace, Adora had sad news for the king and queen.
I'm afraid I must go back to Etheria to help against the Horde.
She said,
I will come home to you once more when my world is free.
We wish you would stay,
said King Randor.
but we understand, and we're proud of you.
The moment Adora went through the Time Gate, she sensed there was trouble afoot. So she was glad to find she wasn't alone. Adam had come through the Time Gate behind her. They looked up to see the sky filled with Horde flyers, and with one accord, they transformed. He-Man on Battle-Cat and She-Ra on Swift Wind raced to join up with the rebels. On the way, She-Ra discovered she had yet more strange powers. She was even able to ask some of the animals to help in the fight to put Queen Angela back on the throne of Bright Moon. Hordak laughed as he saw the rebels moving in to attack the castle. Within seconds, he threw planes, tanks, stun cannons, and troops into action against them. Then He-Man and She-Ra came into the fight, and Hordak's laughter stopped. Not long after that, the rebels entered Castle Bright Moon. Queen Angela was back on the throne, and Hordak and his minions were defeated. He-Man went back to Eternia, but She-Ra stayed behind. As herself, or as Adora, Etheria needed her help. And if ever extra help were needed, He-Man would return.